Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and this is where we talk about how everything on Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. If you are a regular listener, you probably know that we're trying to talk to as many candidates in Windham County ahead of the August 13th primary as possible. So, yay! I want to welcome this week's candidate, Emily Carris Duncan from Whitingham, who is running for Windham 6, which is the seat that is currently held by Tristan Roberts. He is in the process of stepping down. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to welcome regular contributor, Representative Emily Kornheiser, who is one of 3 reps from the town of Brattleboro. And you are going to hear her referred to in this show as Kornheiser, which I hear is a very sporty thing to do. Right, Kornheiser?
That's been my experience at the State House, where I have mostly become Kornheiser because there are already many Emilys up there. And really glad to see you, Olga. Really glad to be here with you today, Emily. And I don't know if, Olga, you did not say this at the top of the hour, but you are also from Whitingham. And I don't know if we've ever had anyone. Oh, no, we have. We had Abby Course on the show from Whitingham once, but it is our guests from Whitingham are few and far between. And so I feel happy for you today, Olga.
I'm feeling very happy on the too.
Show. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Another sneaky reason, Emily, why I was so glad to meet you, because I'm like, oh, goody, someone else from Whitingham.
Oh, I'm so happy. I love the representation. It's so great. Yes.
So, Emily, from what I understand, you are an award-winning textile artist, an educator who grew up in Vermont, left for a while living in Philadelphia, and have returned back to the state. I guess my first question would be is what brought you back to Vermont?
Oh, that's been the coming back home was like a very long-standing goal. I moved out of the state a while back, and I would always, of course, come back and visit family periodically. And every time I came home, I was like, this is the best. I love being here, but I also am adventurous and I like to see things. So I want to say I started contemplating it back in 2014. And it took me a little while to get my ducks in a row. And I was establishing a workshop space down in Philly. So I wanted to make sure I had those good roots. And then I was like, COVID hit, and it was time. It was time to come back.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the next question after that is, now that you're home again and you're kind of settled down, what brought you to decide to run for representative?
Oh, well, it's something that I had contemplated doing for a while, but when Tristan stepped down, there was kind of a vacancy and a need for somebody to step up, and I guess I was like, well, I guess now's the time. But I think with everything going on in the world, especially in the community with education and taxes and all of these things, I am excited and eager to be a part of solution making on these issues.
Yeah, that is a much nicer place to sit, is it, than sitting in the I don't know what to do.
Yeah, and I've been feeling a lot of the I don't know what to do for the last few years, and I was like, well, this is a thing I can do.
Kornheiser, what do you think? What do you want to add?
Excuse me for getting too philosophical here, but and to start off the day at the State House, we often have someone read a poem, or a poet comes to read their own poetry. And one of my favorite poems to read to start off the day is a Marge Piercy poem about to be of use. It's called To Be of Use. And it's just a really beautiful poem. And as I've been knocking on folks' doors to prepare for this next legislative season, so much of what I talk to people about is how, the world feels wild and out of control, and folks don't know what to do, and they feel hopeless. And they're looking for something to hold on to. And I can't think of anything better to do in these tough political and social times than doing exactly what you've decided to do, Emily, is like to step up, to say, I know things are going on in my community and I want to be a part of solutions. And so I really appreciate that you are, I think you're going into this with your eyes wide open and you are still excited to do it. And so I really appreciate that so much. And you have an interesting community that you're going to represent. And so I'm curious, like, I don't know, I think some of our listeners like might not even really know very much about your district. So I wonder if you could describe it to us a little bit.
It is rural. It's real rural. So we're out there in the sticks, and there are, Whitingham has a small community center. Wilmington's kind of our, like, within the district, our larger sort of quote city, town, village catchment with the grocery stores and things. And then Halifax is definitely our more rural out there country that is a lot of back roads. So, we have a lot of issues like around, environment, flooding, climate, living on, dirt roads poses as we know, it's a very Vermonty thing, but like it poses its own levels of challenges, particularly as the snow melts. Getting kids and products and everything else to and from on our windy roads is a whole thing. Yeah, so I think that, like, from what I understand, it's also there are a number of challenges, but it's also so beautiful. I mean, we have like the Harriman Reservoir, and we have fantastic local food. Like the local food scene is the thing I gush about the most.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and it's a really like wonderful community of welcoming folks, and like folks are like very practical here. I feel like, I don't know, would you say that, Olga?
Definitely, I would say that. And I would also say one thing I appreciate about Whitingham is, especially politically, I feel it is much more diverse than some other Vermont communities. You just have a wider swath of people's political beliefs, but also their engagement. But I always really appreciate how people will still be willing to come to the table. For example, I don't know that you ever knew my stepmother, Vanda Warner, but she was a staunch Democrat, like bluer than blue Democrat. And she served on as a justice of the peace for many years, and also did some work with the school. She was a teacher. And there were some folks who were probably more on the conservative side of the spectrum. She would be in meetings and they would have knockdown, drag out fights over what they felt that should happen with the school or what should happen with the town or whatever. And yet at the end of the meeting, they would have come to some kind of agreement and still really respected each other at the end and actually really appreciated each other's difference. And I know that's kind of hokey, but that means a lot to me personally.
Oh, and that's actually a lot of the reason why I wanted to come back. Like, I love the very directness of the direct democracy in Vermont. And it's something that I've never really experienced before. I mean, the fact that you get so many people coming from different cross sections where, like, there's certain issues that, yeah, they're, you're going to have your differences, but they kind of are nonpartisan. Like, we need to just find a practical solution to this. We need to make sure that our kids are educated, that everybody's fed and housed. Like, and we want to find the best solutions for that. And being able to get through and actually do the work of fighting it out means that you've gone through a number of those details, you've worked them out, and yeah, by the end, you've probably come up with a pretty solid solution that people can get behind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I'm like, that's like you were saying, Kornhauser, like, these are the sort of solution orientated, like, roll up your sleeves, like, we gotta move the ball kind of stuff.
Yes.
One thing that it feels like your community has really broad agreement on is feeling like deeply loving and defensive of your very small schools. And so, yeah, I'm curious what your conversations like that have been so far.
I mean, people people understand the importance of having really good, solid public education that's community based, and having the ability for your family and thereby your community to continue to grow and thrive. So when we start hollowing out our education, we're not just shortchanging these children, which is a travesty and criminally wrong, um, but it's also like really stunting the growth of the entire community. So yeah, I mean, to be in a place that understands that importance, my biggest background is in education. I am an education major. I studied in schools in Vermont and elsewhere, up and down from pre-K all the way to university. And throughout that whole thing, it's just public education always. Like schools, they're such a key hub. I I've always found schools to be community centers, like in the broadest sense of that term. So yeah, the conversations I'm having with people around here are just like, we love our school. We love our school. Let's keep our school.
One thing that excited me about your background, Emily, was your background in education. And I think one thing about Whitingham, and I would add Wilmington to this too, since they did merge several years ago into Twin Valley, I think a lot of folks don't realize all the different iterations Whitingham has gone through around education. When Act 60 first went in, um, I remember having a conversation with Anne Manwaring where she described how Whitingham was just in this weird spot of size of population, the type of industry it had, the type of school it had, that it just kind of got in a donut hole with Act 60 and really hit the town hard in some ways. So there was that level. And then there was the merging of Twin Valley, I think before Act 46. Yeah. And so that was another iteration of trying to protect the school and grow and thrive. And I think, I think for some people, I know I saw this in my family, there was just a little bit of exhaustion. Like, when is it going to start feeling okay? And I see you nodding, Emily. It sounds like you're kind of hearing that.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it was you, Kronhauser, or somebody else that was saying, oh, it was Laura Sibilia. She's saying that there's something about like, if it's done in Brattleboro, if it's done in Bennington, then the South has been sort of taken care of. And this
Yeah.
rural expanse between those major population centers just gets completely left behind and donut hole. And then if you also have some level of wealth in these communities, that can also really skew things. So the fact that like I've been hearing more and more about the disinvestment that's gone into education over the years, and like you're saying, this like constant fatigue, and you're just like, I'm just trying to get my kids educated. um, that aspect of it, I completely understand, and I I realize that like I'm really coming from behind with understanding all of the background for everything. So I'm doing a lot of education, like getting caught up with that. But I completely understand that fatigue. I've seen that. I mean, I think I see that all throughout many education systems, especially the public-based ones,
Mm-hmm.
where the uh, the level of siphoning that's happened has left a lot of families really behind and in this, like you said, donut hole
Mhm.
where you're being kind of your resources are being pulled, but you're not getting filled back up.
Mm-hmm. Um,
And
and oh, go ahead, Emily.
I just like I really want to change that. I really want to change that. I just am really passionate about kids getting the education they need.
Mm-hmm. And if I know reps can't always, if you're elected, can't always choose their committees, but it sounds like you'd really like to be on the education committee if you had your druthers.
Yes, absolutely. I'm also very interested in housing and environment too. Um, I mean, I'm really interested in how it all works because it's also interconnected, really.
Yeah.
I think one success story about, school mergers and all of that and community centers is actually the former Wilmington school. And
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
we talk about schools being the center of our communities, and I think there's real anxiety when a school is going to close, or the community center will be lost. I think it's really extraordinary that Wilmington and Whitingham made the decision to actually locate the school in the less populous place. It's very unusual. And I think that's a really helpful way of sort of reducing some of a community's anxiety, is to follow that path. But now, a decade later, the Wilmington, and it took a long time and a lot of people working on it, but what's happening at the community center in Wilmington is also really extraordinary. It's all of the pieces that everyone says should go into a former school building like that, right? It's the early childhood center, it's the exercise classes, it's like fun things to do. It's just, a little bit of everything. And it seems like it's set up for some real sustainability after a lot of folks putting in the effort. And so, I think there's a lot that other places in the state could learn from what Wilmington and Whitingham have done together. Not to leave poor Halifax out.
Just quickly for folks who may not know, so when Wilmington and Whitingham merged, I don't remember the year, into Twin Valley, there was Deerfield Valley Elementary School, in Wilmington, which they kept as the elementary school. And then the middle and high school went to Whitingham, and what was the Whitingham school. And then the community center that Kornheiser just mentioned was the old high school building in Wilmington that has since been transformed into a number of community services, like she mentioned, early child care and pickleball. You can get pickleball classes and you can do exercise, and there's a lot of things happening there. I'm sorry, Emily, I cut you off.
Oh, but I was gonna just to also raise that up. That has been something that I in college actually looked at, like these very comprehensive community care models where education and also these other community services are housed in one place, because education services so often have to dovetail with medical care and social services and food and all of these various components which other people in the community also need. So being able to bring these together in this like multi-generational space, I find these things very interesting.
Oh, that does sound fascinating. When you're out and about talking to folks and education comes up, Kornheiser spent so much of this last session focused on education funding. And she and her colleagues did some pretty Herculean efforts. Yet, I suspect, knowing my neighbors, they have their own thoughts on what should be happening around education. And what are folks sharing with you?
Mostly that the tie and link between our tax system, the property tax system, and the education system is becoming honestly burdensome in a sense. It's for folks that are aging, or people that are renting and don't have kids that are also still trying to make their bills. It becomes a tough expense that they can't see a totally direct benefit from. So having to see taxes, even though I absolutely understand that there is a lot of work done, so much work done to bring things down and back into balance.
Oh, it's still too much. It's still like an absolutely
Yeah,
unacceptable tax burden for Vermonters. I have it's not a thing to celebrate or defend. It's just like, this is the bad situation we're in, and we did our best to mitigate it.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, and that's also the conversation that we're having too. And I think it's such a complicated issue, and there's so many components to it. It's hard to know exactly like what the right answers are, because the governor is definitely giving a different kind of message that people are also getting, which
Mhm.
yeah. So
You're welcome to comment if you want.
I mean, I have, again, it's because I'm still walking into this. I'm still learning. Like, I have no real comment to make about it, because it's still like it's a big complication. And I know that we're not the only system seeing this, that this is like there are so many things that came down because of COVID, because of deferred costs, because of, teachers needing to get pay bumps and everything. It just, America's like a very expensive place to run right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's an understatement.
It's really, the education funding challenges, we're seeing the homelessness and folks struggling with substance use and mental health crises and our rural hospitals. And like all of those are problems that are happening all over, increased gun violence, right? Like that's all happening all over the country. And I think most of us feel like somehow Vermont should be able to be immune to that.
Mm.
And when I am knocking on folks' doors and talking to folks around the community, when I try to contextualize our issues within national context, people generally don't want to hear it. And I also don't want to hear it because I also feel like, oh, well, we should be able to fix it here in Vermont, even if they can't fix it in all these other places, And so I go back and forth with even like, given dysfunction in Washington, like what can we gain from knowing that this is happening everywhere?
Mm.
I mean, I do find it heartening to know like we're not the only ones.
Mm-hmm.
I think in some ways I love Vermont's like very ingrained independence.
Mm-hmm.
We really do. I don't know, part of me wants to see us use it more.
Mm-hmm.
Like, from Vermont, do what we want.
Oh, I want that t-shirt.
On the way. But it is, I'm curious about like, but then at the same time, it is also like there can be limits to things, but I like the idea of being able to really think deeply about some of these issues. Oh no, did I lose you, Gal?
No, we
No.
still see you.
Okay, cool.
We can still hear you.
Okay. But I also understand that there are just practical challenges, like our resources are what we have, and we have to figure out how to use them the best that we can to hopefully get them on a growth track.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I think what you said, Emily, about a growth track is really intriguing, because the other thing I would say about some of our small communities in Vermont, definitely, but I would say Vermont as a whole, is we've gotten really good at doing a lot with a little. And so there is often this scarcity mindset. And I think sometimes when we're looking to growth, that they start butting heads. I'm curious, what, from your perspective, when you say let's get on a growth track, do you have any thoughts on what that might look like, or what might have to start shifting first? Oh, I love how you tented your fingers there, like, ooh, let's think about this.
Well, there we have the tourism tension, but it is in some ways kind of our lowest hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that we have that we can build on. A lot of it is just like getting the word out, and I think we can do those in ways that don't cost like a ton of money. But there's also like such a built-in like broad-based social trust about the Vermont brand.
Mm.
Like outside the state, everybody loves Vermont. It is the symbol of relaxation, cows, rolling hills, and good cheese.
We call it Vermont TM here on the show.
Yes, it is. It is Vermont TM, right? And I think being able to just like get that word out to other other communities. There are plenty of communities, color queer communities also are, the world to come and join us. But then I also think I take a lot. This is not any kind of derogatory thing, but I really take a lot of inspiration from compost. There's something about like the nutrient density of compost that I and being able to talk about making something out of nothing, like you're really making something super rich out of absolute somebody else's waste. So we have so many talented people like in the in our communities that are, you know, making things that are artists, creators, creatives, and being able to highlight that and the work that they're doing. I there's this company called Missouri Star. It's a quilting company. I always take a lot of inspiration from them. This woman turned over an entire town based on her quilts. She started quilting and posting them on YouTube, got a good following with that. And then people started visiting and they're like, oh, we should probably give them something to do. So so, you know, like the town diner got opened again, you know, they were able to do like other tourist activities and it kind of really revived the region. So I think being able to do something that leans in on all of our creative crafts and um, can kind of draw people towards us. I think those are some like very like small thoughts. I think there's some much bigger things that will definitely need to be taken care of. But yeah.
Thank you. We are just a couple minutes before we need to hear from underwriters. Emily or Kornheiser, is there anything you want to leave listeners with before we take a quick break?
I'm excited about sort of this idea that you brought up, Emily, of diving deeper into sort of the creative economy, as people call it, or makers or artists or whatever it is, and how I think the more folks that we have in the policy making arena, and there's a lot of exciting potential this year with both you and Zon Eastis running, right? Who've like sort of made your lives in those places. Because when I talk, like the creative economy is always considered separate from the economy from the perspective of state government. And just like the idea that these are people like running small businesses that have healthcare needs, just like all of the same way we also, you know, we've talked a lot on the show about how we think of farmers as sort of separate from the regular economy, right? But like,
but they're entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Yeah,
and have like specific needs and specific growth and specific opportunities there that strengthen and improve all of our lives. And I think there's just so much potential for what we could do there. And I'm glad that that's something that you are able to bring to the table.
Well, thank you. Yes, I like this idea of an integrative economic model.
Yes.
So hang tight, folks. The Montpelier Happy Hour on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro will return in just a moment, so don't touch your dial. Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. If you're just joining us, I am the host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and I'm speaking with regular contributor, Representative Emily Kornheiser, who's one of 3 reps from the town of Brattleboro, and candidate for the Wyndham 6th District, Emily Carris Duncan, who is from my neck of the woods, Whitingham. And we've been having a lot of fun talking about our neck of the woods, which often doesn't get talked about. So I'm so glad you're here, Emily.
Thank you for having me. So glad to be here with you.
Very glad you're here. Before we dive back in, of course, we want to thank BCTV for taking the video version of our show and sharing it with public access stations and media centers around Vermont. And before I forget, Kornheiser, what should we remind listeners of?
The views and opinions expressed here on the Montpelier Happy Hour are those of the host and the guests, respectively, not the station nor the platform, nor their employees nor friends.
Why, thank you.
You're welcome.
Or Emily's really awesome record collection that's behind her right now.
Oh, 'tis true.
So during the break, Emily, we were having a little chat and you brought up something that I think I am hearing more and more about these days from just those coffee table conversations. And that's around taxes and people feeling really burdened, and maybe even like Vermont's not their home anymore because of
Yeah.
this. Could you tell us more about those conversations?
Yeah, I'm hearing this a lot from many folks that the tax situation is having people feel like they're being pushed out.
Mm.
That the only way that you can afford to live here is if you have the money to do so, and that we're becoming some sort of like country club. And
Mm.
and I can say that the thing I find so interesting is after living in cities like New York and Philadelphia and San Francisco and in London, coming and seeing these cycles happen in urban centers where
Hmm.
people get pushed out of their neighborhoods partly because many people are renters, and so the renter cycles are a lot faster.
Mm.
Seeing this in spaces where the home ownership rate is much higher, but the same pressures are kind of in place that are pushing people out of their homes. It feels like a type of rural gentrification that happens. I don't know if it's intentional, but it does end up feeling that way. So I think the emotional underpinning of all of these, tax frustrations and stuff is this feeling like Vermont, we're like, you know, Vermont is a different kind of place. Like when it has you, it has you. So you don't really want to have to leave it
Hmm.
if you don't have to. So, but when you get to the point where you're like, I can't actually afford to live here, that's something.
Hmm.
And
Well,
it's
and
interesting.
oh, go
Go ahead,
ahead, Emily.
Olga. No, you go
No, go.
ahead.
I was going to say it's two things came up to me while you were talking, Emily, and the first was I think for communities like Whitingham or Guilford or Halifax, Reedsboro that are really on the border of New Hampshire and Massachusetts, where wages tend to be higher, I think that tension can even be feel stronger because you can kind of like
Yep.
see what the other half is doing.
Yep.
Hmm.
But the other
Uh-huh.
thing that came up for me was, and yay, I lived in London briefly too, favorite city. Um,
Yes.
but it was a real eye opener for me because it was the first time I had earned wages outside the Vermont, like seriously earned wages outside the Vermont economy. And when I came home, even though London was so expensive, my wages and my cost of living were just a little bit closer. And
Hmm.
so when I came home, boy, Vermont felt expensive to me. And it was for me, in my experience, it was the difference in wages. Um, but I don't
And
know.
I completely agree. And I think what's difficult is if you come here as a visitor, like it feels inexpensive on its face because you're coming from New York or wherever where a burger can cost you $25, and you come here and you'll be like, oh well, it's like $8 to $10. Like that seems like a bargain. And then you live here and there is, the cost of living here is very high. And so it's just,
Because
yeah, that money that's
yeah, because the wages are so
yeah.
low. And I think
Yeah.
it's a particularly interesting thing about the property taxes in those same areas that you've both described, because you have this really high proportion of second homes, or folks who have newly moved here, where in sort of a frame that the property values were seemed low to them. And so that drives up the property values of surrounding homes that might not be likely candidates for second homes, but get sort of lumped into I don't want to get like too deep into the details of appraisals, but like when you have small towns where appraisals don't happen where properties don't change hands, appraisals don't happen very often, you wind up with comps that are a little weird. And so someone's, tax rate might not even go up that much. If their property value is going up, that can feel totally out of control to them. And if you don't want to leave, you don't get sort of that like residual joy that like someday your investment's going to be worth more, right? If you're not actually planning on moving. And so it's this
Yeah.
really interesting dynamic where how sort of the second homes sustain the tourism economy that we talked, in the first half of the hour about sustaining. but they're real drivers in the gentrification process around, rural gentrification process around housing. And it makes it's really hard. It's really hard to thread that needle. And I think we need to do a lot to create a tax structure that's much more discerning about people's ability to pay. And in order to make sure that this is a state that continues to be a place where everyone can live and thrive.
Yeah, because also to your previous point, if this is also happening elsewhere in the country, where exactly are people supposed to decamp to?
It's a
Back
good
to the
question.
city.
Like that's the thing.
No,
It's
I'm
like
just kidding.
But the same thing's happening over there too.
Well, that's one reason, Emily, when you were talking about the creative economy, I felt really excited because there are benefits to the Deerfield Valley's. Ooh, as I knocked my computer, talking with my hands. The Deerfield Valley's tourist economy really has some benefits. It brings people here. Our economy is probably bigger than it would be if we didn't have people coming and visiting. Unfortunately, it's also mostly what people rely on, which I just feel mono economies are very vulnerable. Like a mill town, tourist town, same thing. Mono economies are vulnerable.
I mean, that's not just a feeling you have, Olga. That's like an evidence-based
that's
reality.
just facts.
Yeah, one would say so,
Yeah.
but there's some people really attached to tourism in Wilmington who do not want to hear that. But
No, I
the
think
other
we need to diversify.
Yes. Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Emily. But the other thing that can be a downside to the tourist economy is a lot of the jobs may not actually pay well. And so with the creative economy, what I love about that is it gives me hope that there's a chance that people could earn better wages if we were to add that to the mix.
Oh, absolutely. And I think with the inside the creative economy is also like creative manufacturing and like all sorts of kind of large, what do I want to say? Like kind of further on, it's not just necessarily like being in your studio making paints.
Right. Right. And it's all the industries that support that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are a lot of them. Yeah. I mean, the arts are like, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Like for a reason.
Yeah, we forget that part. Kornheiser, I have another question for Emily, but it would kind of change the topic. So before we do that, is there anything you wanted to add to the conversation?
I will surf along on this ride.
Okay. Oh, before I ask this first question, I was going to ask, Emily Kornheiser had talked about people's ability to pay and a tax structure. Again, when you're out and about hearing from people, do they give you any insight into like where the tax structure needs to change the most, or like what's their perception of this of taxes?
I think there's a lot of just questions about the link of education to property tax.
Okay.
Especially for our older folks.
A slight segue, but Kornheiser, there had been some things moving through the State House, kind of looking at that connection, property taxes and ed taxes. Are they going anywhere? Anything we should be keeping our eyes on around that?
I mean, there was a pretty comprehensive summer task force on moving to an income base for education funding, and folks can go read that thrilling report if they're interested. It's actually a very good report. It's one of the better written reports that we've had. So folks can find that on the Joint Fiscal Office website if they're interested. And it's certainly a perennial question. And I think in this next year, we're going to be doing like some pretty serious overhauls of our education finance system. And so there's certainly opportunities to go deeper there. It's interesting when I've been talking to folks, a lot of folks say, I can pay my property taxes. I'm worried about my neighbor who. And I don't know if that's just like humans being human verbally. I don't really have a better way of explaining that, but I think a lot of folks also don't understand how our property tax credit system will adjust to someone's income, right?
Right.
And so for folks with lower incomes, we do essentially have an income-based system. It's just not subsidized by like a leap to what a top income tax bracket might pay into that system. And so in terms of affordability on the lower end, it really is already set up as an income-based system. What I've been struggling with, I'm so curious about, as I've been knocking on doors in this conversation, is like, older Vermonters who are on a fixed income, who have questions about, property tax exemptions and an interest in property tax exemptions at this point in their life. And then knowing that we're also like the oldest state one of the oldest states in the country, and we're getting older. And so if we did do that, who would be our tax base for our schools? And so who would we be placing an even larger burden on? That would be families of young children who have mortgages that they might be taking on in this mortgage market, with housing that they might have tried to finance in this housing market, with childcare needs and student loan debt. And it's not necessarily folks who are more able to pay, though it might not be folks with a fixed income. And so squeezing the balloon, or I'm not finding, is that a metaphor that works for folks? It's really hard to see where the right adjustments will be able to make the right difference.
Yeah. I keep wondering historically which generations have had this particular type of squeeze. Because it seems like, and what they did to get out of it. Because it seems like at this point, I mean, it used to be a sandwich, but now it feels like it's more of a box-shaped squeeze.
One of those medieval rooms that's coming, the walls are getting closer.
Yep.
Yes.
There's a really great Ezra Klein episode, if folks want, not to like podcast reference on the podcast, but it's a recent one, and it's actually him talking to his wife, who's an economist who writes for The Atlantic a lot, which is just like a little too cute. But it was a really interesting conversation about how, as the economy is actually hypothetically doing well and wages have gone up in really significant ways, even here in Vermont, the non-negotiable costs in our life are really huge squeezes right now, and those keep on going up. And that's sort of why so many of us feel so like, roughed up by the economy.
Oh, absolutely. And that's been also that hasn't been just this recovery.
No.
Like that's been since 2008. And there's been such little acknowledgement that our broad-based economy, that we have, young people coming into this economy like at a pretty regular clip, that are kind of there's like one promise given to them and this whole other thing that happens when they get here. And it's tough.
Yeah. My editor, Randy Holhut at the Commons, he remembers Brattleboro when it had much more of an industrial base, and 3-shift work and that type of thing. And he says, there was a time in Brattleboro you could graduate from high school, go right into trades or manufacturing, and raise a family and send kids to college and own a house and go on vacation. And he's like, that's not the lifestyle for many people anymore, unfortunately.
But that's also living memory for a lot of us.
Yeah.
And that can build resentment.
Very good point.
I also think it's really interesting that like those jobs are still there, right? Like that I think is part of like one of the funny disconnects of that, right? Like those jobs are still there. They're still hiring. They're still like pretty actively, desperately hiring. They pay better than most tourist jobs, for instance. And there's a disconnect, and like it's still, you definitely need 2 earners in the household for that to be enough to be, buying a home. and going to college, sending kids to college. But it's like we have these like tiny micro economies and people aren't sort of connecting with each other or connecting with what it means for the shape of our towns. I'm not sure if that makes sense as a sentence.
It does make sense. And I appreciate what you're saying, Emily. I don't think the jobs are there in the same number they were.
No.
And so the economy has shifted. But no, you're right. We do have a bunch of disconnects in our economy. And one thing, I'll just put this out here. I don't know that it's helpful. One thing I always find interesting when I'm talking to economic development folks is I'll say, well, what kind of, they'll say, well, we have to do this, we need to retrain people so they can take this type of job. And I'll say, well, what type of skills does your community already have? And maybe then you should attract those jobs. And there's like, talk about a disconnect. I get this blank look of, wait, you mean find the business to fit the worker rather than make the worker fit the business? I don't know that that's useful. I'm just throwing it out there. Like, I'm not sure that how we're doing it works.
I think that makes a whole lot more sense than the way that we're doing it. Like we have all of these, but we have. Can y'all still hear me?
I can still, yeah, we can still hear you.
But they're just these like nebulous market incentives, usually from people that help or companies and organizations that have ideas about technology and how that should work. That I feel like just sort of descend their ideas on the rest of the culture and says, bend to us. Like, meanwhile, you're like, I still am like on this mountaintop needing to heat my home and the power went out. It's the middle of winter.
Yes, yes.
And they're like, well, AI will fix it. And I'm like, how?
AI thinks I'm located in Quebec. No, that's not going to help.
Yeah, right.
Quick change of topic, Emily, since we're getting now to the end of the show. If you are elected, you will be a second generation legislator. With your dad, Bill Carris, having been a state senator and a majority leader in the early 2000s, mid to early 2000s. How does that feel, knowing that you might be following your dad's footsteps or not?
Yeah. It's, in a lot of ways, it's very exciting. Like I don't know. It feels like a great honor, honestly. My dad is such a well-respected person, and I admire him as a business person, as a lawmaker, and it feels really exciting to have the opportunity to do it at all. I am not necessarily I don't know. I guess I'm sorry. I become a little speechless behind it because it really is a great honor, and it's been wonderful to be able to work with him on this. It is like the coolest part of our relationship. It's really neat.
And what kind of advice has he given you?
He's your campaign manager, right, Emily?
He is my campaign manager.
Okay, so he's giving you lots of advice.
Yeah, he's like, make sure you put on the miles, knock on the doors, and also just like take it one day at a time and try not to. It's a lot. It's overwhelming at times, but also you can handle it. Just take it one day at a time and don't sweat the small stuff.
Mm-hmm. And have you had a chance to talk with him about how the State House may have changed since he was, because I think he said he left in 2012, which would have been right after Irene.
Yeah.
Which was a big shakeup in Vermont. And now you're coming in a few years after, but still COVID, big shakeup.
Yeah.
What have you talked about?
I think in some ways, like we've talked a bit about how it's changed, but also how some of these issues are kind of evergreen. Like you said, like Irene was a big, huge shift. COVID was a huge shift. We keep getting these kinds of large encroachments, I guess, these big encroaching events. And in some ways, that's nothing new for Vermont. Like Vermont is a very resilient place that's seen this stuff happen before. But you know, if it does keep coming at such a clip, it gets hard to do the cleanup and the management and the rebuilding that's needed. And you know, so we do talk about that, the importance of being able to have a system that is resilient enough to rebuild quickly.
Interesting. Kornheiser, what do you want to add?
I think, you know, I think a lot of people think politics is like having your name on a lawn sign or being able to sort of like feel important in a meeting. And the reality is it's like putting a lot of miles on your shoes and spending a lot of time sitting far away from your family in a stuffy conference room. And so I like the fact that I know that you know that, Emily, like you know how hard this is for the rest of your family and for your relationships and like driving in the bad weather and like just sort of the reality of the, you know, fullest time volunteer job that ever was, I think is like really helpful to sort of serve you as you move forward with this process. And yes, like most of these issues are evergreen. And you know, I remember showing up in the State House with some sort of feeling of like, I've named the problems and so they're solvable. And then realized like, oh, most people there have also named these same problems. And then in fact, like there's still, a lot of them are still unsolved because they're really hard to solve. Some of them are still unsolved because of the demographics of who serves in the legislature and what people care about. You know, I think there's a lot of class issues related to that. But it's, you know, I think the grounding that you're going in with is going to make this process much more, I don't know if I want to say easeful, but maybe less disappointing.
I do appreciate that. I mean, I'm grateful to have the perspective to go in eyes wide open. And it was also really interesting talking to my mom about the family stuff too, because I got to see it from that perspective and from being a family member of it. And it's a whole different thing being the person that goes up.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it was nice to talk to her and have her also be very encouraging and say, it is a lot. It is a sacrifice. It's true, but it's worth it. And it's worth doing. But my husband he's new to Vermont. He's like kind of new to all this. So I think for him, it'll be an experience.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, we wish him luck.
Yeah. And with that, the show's over. Thanks, Olga. Nice one.
Kind of where I was going. No, I have one more question for you, Emily, and it's if you are elected, what are you most looking forward to?
Making solutions. I'm really excited about it. I don't think I realized how much I needed to or would like to be in a position of actually making kind of larger level or more impactful solutions. I think I'm excited to also get to know people and get to know this district more. There's so many cool people in this district. All right, that was too many. That was a number of things. I'm just really excited for this.
Thank you. Well, we wish you lots of luck. If people want to reach out to you, Emily, how can they do that?
Yeah, so my email is ecarris, Carris, Duncan, Duncan, @gmail.com. Or yeah, email's definitely the best way. You can also feel free to text me, 802-779-6826.
And do you have a campaign website?
I do. It is ecarrisduncan.com.
Very good. I will put those in the show notes for folks. Emily, if folks want to reach out to you, how can they get in touch?
Folks can go to emilykornheiser.org, and there you'll find all the various contact informations, and hope to find you on your doorstep soon as well.
Well, thank you to Emily Carris Duncan, who is running for Wyndham 6th District and she's in Whitingham, as well as Representative Emily Kornheiser out of Brattleboro. So glad you're both here. And of course, you can find the Montpelier Happy Hour every Friday at 2 on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. We're also rebroadcast on Wednesday mornings, same station, and of course, wherever you subscribe to your podcasts. Have a good weekend, everybody. Take care.